This week I built a city, turned on the gravity, and we tested some aerospace fighters. Turns out that fighting in gravity is quite different, and we learned a lot. Okay, so we're seeing two of the fighters here, Ketobar and the Mighty Mage, fighting. Ketobar is reusing a fighter from his standard set, and I don't really know what the Mighty Mage is using. It looks like a sleek little ship that he threw together quickly, he says. Ketobar's ship is configured with reloadable missile launchers, so he just spams missiles all day. In fact, he doesn't have any other weapons on his ship. And that makes him hard to beat, because Gatling guns are not very effective. In this case, he does end up losing, mostly because he momentarily loses track of which direction is up and which direction is down. It was the first fight of the evening, and we hadn't gotten used to the directionality of gravity just yet. Now I built this ship here, the Kermit. The Kermit has some non-reloadable missile pods and some Gatling guns, and it's a vanilla ship. The Kermit has as many upwards engines as forward engines, and that helps me to keep off the ground. However, I radically misunderstood how you actually fight in a strong gravity well like this one. So the gravity in this world goes down to 0.1 when you're this high up, but it quickly increases as you approach the ground, until it's at 1 when you get all the way to the ground. Having a high gravity really does slow fighters down immensely, and that really had a huge effect on our fights and on our armaments. Here I decide to take on the Mighty Mage and Kermit, but I forgot to put the missiles on the hotbar, so I have no way to trigger them, and therefore I spend the whole battle shooting at him with Gatling guns. Gatling guns are basically worthless, and missiles are hugely effective in these high-gravity environments because everyone's fighters are so much slower. So I was at a huge disadvantage. As you can probably tell, the defining characteristic of aerospace fights is the gravity. It's really hard to gain altitude when you're at a high gravity level, and here we're both sluggishly trying to get off the ground, and it's not going so well for either of us. That makes both of our ships very slow. In a gravity well, you're gonna have your inertial dampeners firing all the time, and that means that 2 or 3 orthogonal directions are going to be firing because you're almost never even with the ground. So if you're maneuvering on any of those orthogonal directions, the other orthogonal engines start to push you in an awkward way, and it becomes harder to control. Everything becomes sluggish, and you kind of drift awkwardly, so collisions become a little bit more common. Examining the damage to my ship reveals that exposed cockpits really suck, and I was 100% right to build fighters that didn't have them before. But they look nice. Now, I follow Missile Protocol. Missile Protocol says if you have a non-reloadable missile launcher, you only get 4 shots with it. Otherwise, they are incredibly overpowered. I kind of assumed everyone was following Missile Protocol, but either he wasn't, because no one had explained it to him, or he had reloadable missile launchers and I didn't realize that. But either way, I had planned this whole last tangle here around the idea that he wouldn't blow me up with missiles from close range. But he did blow me up, so I definitely lost that match. Here I engage with Ketobar's upwards strafing missile ship, and it is pretty much ideal for these sorts of situations. He definitely dominated the arena, partly because his ship design was perfectly suited for it, and partly because he's just a better pilot than I am. But missiles, turns out, they are basically the dominant strategy in the atmosphere. Guns are totally worthless in comparison. Unlike in space, even a glancing missile hit can be seriously deadly, because if you lose engines like I did, then gravity just hurls you down into the ground. And in this case, although I didn't realize it, I had long ago cratered and I was falling way, way past the the edge of the city, all of my rear engines were out and all of my upwards engines had been destroyed by one missile hit. So this was my loss. The Kermit ended up being a bit of a design disappointment, but we learned so much about operating in gravity. I don't believe that I could have designed a ship to operate in gravity without losing all these matches with the Kermit, because I honestly did not understand what it was like to try and fight in gravity, especially if you count the bottom of the city as cratering even if you fall past it. In the end, one missile hit was almost always enough to destroy me, because any of my engines going down meant I no longer had enough engines to stay airborne. See there? I've just lost. And then, of course, he finishes me off because he's that kind of gentleman. When I moved on to destroyers and frigates and cars and stuff, Ketobar kept working on fighters, and this is his pinnacle design, the Glass Dagger. It's an incredibly effective ship that's perfectly suited for atmospheric combat, and yeah, it kicked my ass. The Kermit wasn't very well designed to start with, and he's usually a better fighter pilot than me by at least some small margin, so in the end, I got my ass kicked a lot. I did later get a chance to fly it, and it is an ugly beast, but it is super effective, and it's just a giant stack of reloadable missile launchers configured in the perfect way to shrug off damage and be very, very mobile. The Kermit, on the other hand, basically is just built to die as quickly as possible when a missile hits it on the forehead. My limited missile barrage against his firing computer-controlled unlimited missile barrage never really held up. I did win a couple of times just due to clumsy piloting on his part, but I lost just as many times due to clumsy piloting on mine. Things started to get interesting when we started to really use the city, and this is why I came up with the tanks idea. I really want to try and use a city, so I'm building a bigger, better city for next week, and we're going to see a lot more of these kinds of interesting combats. My idea was to let him close so that I could hit him with missiles, but as I mentioned, it's hard to control your acceleration in gravity wells, and I ended up ramming him more than once. This kind of coy combat was really interesting and played out really well, but it does mean that if we hadn't been using beacons, things would have been very different, and I really am looking forward to trying some stuff like that next week. Can you imagine some tank battles where neither side has any beacon on? You gotta try and track each other down. For this battle we switched ships, and I took his glass cannon into the fight while he took a Kermit. He modified the Kermit to have a little bit more armor, as you can see here, which proved to be very effective. But the end result is, he's just a better pilot than me in these situations. I rely too heavily on first-person views or cameras, whereas he's extremely good at estimating exact missile hits from third-person view. And basically, I'm making an excuse for the fact that I got my ass kicked even when I had the better ship. One of the things that's different between this sort of situation and the Fighter League that sometimes people link me to, the Fighter League uses scatter cannons, Oop, and scatter cannons are much, much more dangerous than Gatling guns. So, if you were watching, you probably saw that the Kermit took 2 straight-on missile hits without dying, which is vastly better than I ever managed. That simple armor screen really accomplished a lot, and therefore, it was time to start to modify the Kermit so that it had that integrally. And that's what I did. I also swapped in some better weapons because the Gatling guns are annoyingly bad. Yeah, that's not an annoying sound or anything. Ugh. Although the scatter cannons are undoubtedly better at this kind of combat, once we were out of the gravity field, or at least out to the part where it started to thin, it was much, much easier to move around, and we kept getting to extremely long distances, which means that nobody was going to do any damage to anybody. So these battles went on for a while, but Ketobar was trying hard to make normal Gatling guns work. I would say that he did not, because normal Gatling guns cannot be made to work, but later on he'll staple 30 of them to one ship, and it will do a little bit of damage to me. In this case, we both crater, just due to sloppy piloting. This battle goes my way because I preserved just enough missiles to hit him at 0 range, so it was the missiles, not the guns. And while the missiles didn't kill him, they did take out his maneuvering engines, which meant that he couldn't stay up in the air anymore, and eventually he cratered. Goodbye. So long. Goodbye. Here I examine the damage that he did with his Gatling ship, and the answer is he didn't really do anything. He blew off a camera and 2 missile pods that I had already finished using. Gatling guns just aren't very effective. We did some damage tests, and they are remarkably effective if they hit the exact same block a lot. But they're just not effective if either ship is moving, and as it turns out, that's kind of a thing that fighters tend to do. None of the Gatling weapons are really very effective. Even these scatter guns, which people insist might be overpowered, they don't really feel overpowered. Not really. Ketobar is determined to make Gatling guns work, so he's attached like 30 of them to one ship, and I'm not really exaggerating. And at that point, they do start to work. I really liked that fight. It was a suitably epic final fight for the day. After this we did some weapons tests, but that was basically it. In the end, the result is fighting in a gravity well is incredibly fun. It totally changes the rules of the game, and it makes everything feel very heavy and slow. Unfortunately, it also makes missiles absolute king, so there is that problem. If you wanted to play around with some vehicles on the ground, definitely come by next week. We'll be doing tanks and mechs and stuff.